courtroom was packed on a Monday morning, filled with the hum of whispers and the occasional shuffle of papers. Judge Raymond Hartford, a stern man in his late 50s with a salt and pepper mustache and a reputation for being unsparingly strict, adjusted his robe and scanned the docket before him. He prided himself on being a no-nonsense judge, known for his efficiency, but also for his often curt demeanor, especially toward those he subconsciously deemed as troublemakers. As his eyes landed on the next case, a tinge of annoyance flickered across his face. Case number 317, Parker, Naomi. He glanced at the notes. Minor traffic infraction, failure to yield. Bring in the defendant, he ordered, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. Naomi Parker entered the courtroom, her posture straight, her expression calm but alert. She wore a sharp navy blue blazer over a white blouse, paired with black slacks. Her natural curls framed her face, and her confidence exuded a quiet power that made heads turn. Raymond's eyes narrowed. Here we go, another one who thinks she's above the law, he thought. To him, her crisp attire and confident stride read as arrogance. Miss Parker, he began, emphasizing her name as if it were a reprimand. You've been charged with failing to yield at a stop sign. Do you understand the charges against you? Naomi's lips curved into a faint smile, one that wasn't disrespectful but held a touch of irony. Yes, Your Honor. I understand the charges. Good. Let's keep this brief, he snapped. The officer's report states you were driving through Oakwood Avenue and ignored a clearly marked stop sign. Do you dispute this? Naomi tilted her head slightly. I don't dispute that I was in the area, but I'd like to note that the sign in question is partially obscured by overgrown tree branches. It's a common issue on that street. Raymond's irritation deepened. So, you're saying you're not responsible for your actions because of a tree? No, Your Honor, she said, her tone steady. I'm pointing out a contributing factor that makes compliance difficult for any driver unfamiliar with the area. Raymond leaned back in his chair. Unfamiliar? The officer's report indicates you live in the area. Naomi's jaw tightened slightly, but she maintained her composure. I do, Your Honor, but that doesn't negate the fact that the stop sign is not visible from certain angles. Raymond tapped his pen against the desk, his irritation morphing into condescension. Miss Parker, let me save you some time. It doesn't matter if the stop sign was obscured by a tree, a pole, or a marching band. The law is the law. I'm fining you $250, plus court fees. Naomi opened her mouth to respond, but Raymond raised his hand. Unless you'd like to appeal, this case is closed. She paused, her eyes locking onto his. Understood, Your Honor. As the gavel slammed down, Raymond expected her to retreat like most defendants. Instead, Naomi stood there for a moment, her gaze piercing but unreadable. She nodded politely and turned to leave. A week later, Raymond Hartford rarely thought twice about the cases he presided over. For him, each one was a number, a file, and a verdict. But as he walked into the courthouse that morning, he was greeted with unusual energy in the building. His clerks whispered among themselves, and even the bailiffs seemed unusually animated. What's going on? Raymond barked at his clerk, a young man named Alan. Sir, there's a high-profile case being heard today. It's in courtroom B, Alan stammered. High-profile? Raymond repeated, raising an eyebrow. What kind of case? Alan hesitated. It's a federal prosecution, sir. Organized crime. The lead prosecutor just arrived. Raymond waved him off and headed toward his chambers, but curiosity gnawed at him. He glanced toward courtroom B and froze mid-step. Naomi Parker stood at the prosecutor's table, surrounded by a team of attorneys and FBI agents. For a moment, his mind struggled to reconcile the woman before him with the one he had found the week before. But there was no mistaking it. The same poised demeanor, the same sharp eyes. Only now she wasn't a defendant. She was the lead federal prosecutor in a case that had drawn national attention. During the lunch break, Raymond found himself unable to focus on his own docket. His curiosity, and perhaps a sliver of guilt, drove him to the cafeteria, where he spotted Naomi sitting alone, reviewing files. Summoning his courage, he approached her table. Miss Parker. She looked up, her expression neutral but guarded. Judge Hartford. He cleared his throat. I didn't realize you were... Well, in your position. Naomi raised an eyebrow. A federal prosecutor? Yes, he admitted, shifting uncomfortably. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze steady. Why would that matter, Your Honor? He opened his mouth, then closed it, struggling for words. I may have been... overly dismissive during your case last week. I wasn't aware of your credentials. Naomi's lips curved into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. I appreciate the acknowledgement, Judge Hartford, but my credentials shouldn't matter. Everyone deserves respect in your courtroom, whether they're a federal prosecutor or a grocery store clerk. Her words hit him like a gavel to the chest. Over the following weeks, the encounter with Naomi Parker stayed with Raymond. It wasn't just her words, but the realization of his own biases. He began to reflect on the countless cases he had rushed through, the assumptions he had made based on appearances, and the subtle ways his prejudices had influenced his decisions. Raymond started attending implicit bias training, reading books on systemic inequality, and engaging in conversations he would have avoided before. It was a slow and uncomfortable process, but one he knew was necessary. One day, as he walked past Courtroom B, he saw Naomi delivering a closing argument. Her voice was powerful, her presence commanding. She wasn't just fighting for justice in the case. She was embodying it. Raymond nodded to himself. He still had a long way to go, but he was learning, and for that, he had Naomi Parker to thank. Judge Raymond Hartford couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort. Days turned into weeks, yet Naomi Parker's words echoed in his mind, louder with each passing day. He'd built a career on the principles of law, justice, and order, but now he was beginning to see how blind those principles could be when applied without introspection. However, life had a way of making sure lessons stuck, and Raymond's would soon come in a way he never anticipated. One Thursday morning, as Raymond sifted through his daily mail, he noticed an unmarked envelope slipped between legal documents and junk mail. The envelope was plain, with no return address. Curious, he opened it. Inside was a typed letter. Judge Hartford, you've made a name for yourself as a man of the law. But how often do you stop to question the system you serve? I suggest you look closer at your own courtroom. What you find might surprise you. A concerned observer. Raymond frowned. The letter wasn't threatening, but it was unsettling. Who had sent it? And what did they mean by look closer at your own courtroom? Later that week, Raymond presided over the sentencing of a young black man named Elijah Hayes. Charged with burglary, Elijah had pleaded not guilty, maintaining that he'd been misidentified. The evidence against him was circumstantial fingerprints on a surface near the crime scene, but the prosecutor had built a compelling narrative of guilt. As Elijah stood before him for sentencing, something gnawed at Raymond. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the case felt off. Mr. Hayes, Raymond began, do you have any final statements before I deliver your sentence? Elijah's eyes were heavy with exhaustion but burned with a quiet desperation. Your Honor, I didn't do this. I've never even been to that neighborhood. I was at work that night, and my boss can vouch for me, but no one listened. Raymond glanced at the defense attorney, who looked disheveled and unprepared. He realized the man had barely put up a fight during the trial. Why didn't you call this employer as a witness? Raymond asked. The attorney stammered. We couldn't reach him in time, Your Honor. Raymond's irritation flared. That's not good enough. A man's freedom is on the line. Something in Elijah's gaze reminded Raymond of Naomi Parker's calm defiance. Against protocol, he decided to delay the sentencing. I'm postponing this until further investigation can be conducted, Raymond declared. The prosecutor objected, but Raymond overruled him. Justice isn't served by rushing through half-baked cases, he snapped. Raymond couldn't let the matter rest. He ordered his clerk, Alan, to pull Elijah's file and began reviewing it himself. As he dug deeper, inconsistencies started to emerge. Witnesses who couldn't agree on key details, evidence that was weak at best, and a defense attorney who had clearly been out of his depth. The more Raymond uncovered, the angrier he became, not at Elijah, but at himself. How many similar cases had he presided over without noticing these flaws? Then, late one evening, Alan knocked on his door. Judge Hartford, you might want to see this, he said, handing over a stack of documents. It was a police report from a nearby precinct, one that had been buried in the system. The report contained a statement from a different suspect who had confessed to the burglary Elijah was accused of. Somehow, this crucial piece of evidence had never made it to court. Raymond called an emergency hearing. The prosecutor squirmed as Raymond presented the evidence in open court. Elijah's face was a mixture of disbelief and hope as the judge announced his decision. This case is dismissed, Raymond declared, his voice firm. Mr. Hayes, you are free to go. Applause erupted from the gallery, but Raymond wasn't finished. He turned to the prosecutor. I expect a full report on why this evidence was withheld and who is responsible for this gross miscarriage of justice." After the hearing, Raymond caught a glimpse of Naomi Parker in the hallway. She had been observing from the back, her expression unreadable. "You're learning, Judge Hartford," she said simply before walking away. The Elijah Hayes case sparked a chain reaction. The investigation into the missing evidence revealed systemic corruption within the local precinct. Officers had been burying exonerating evidence to close cases quickly, and certain prosecutors were complicit. Raymond found himself at the center of the storm. His court became a focal point for public scrutiny, with journalists and activists demanding accountability. Though the pressure was immense, Raymond felt a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he wasn't just going through the motions. He was fighting for something greater. One day, as he was leaving the courthouse, Raymond was approached by a young black woman. She introduced herself as Tasha, Elijah Hayes' sister. "Thank you, Judge Hartford," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved my brother's life. Most judges wouldn't have cared." Raymond shook his head. "I almost didn't care. And for that, I owe your family an apology. I'm trying to do better." Tasha studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Keep trying. People are watching." Naomi Parker continued to cross paths with Raymond as more corruption cases came to light. Though their interactions were brief, there was a growing respect between them. One day, Raymond asked her, "Why do you keep showing up to these hearings? You don't have to be here." Naomi's eyes softened. "Because change doesn't happen in a vacuum, Judge Hartford. And because I believe even people like you can learn to see the bigger picture." Raymond chuckled, though it was tinged with self-deprecation. "People like me, huh?" She smiled. "You're getting there." The story had become more than a simple courtroom drama. It was a battle for justice, redemption, and the dismantling of a broken system. And Raymond Hartford, once blind to his own biases, was now at the forefront of the fight. As Judge Raymond Hartford dove deeper into exposing corruption, he began to face resistance. Not just from the system but from colleagues, former allies, and even his own family. His brother, a retired police officer, called him one evening. "Ray, you're stirring a hornet's nest," his brother warned. "You think you're doing the right thing, but you're putting yourself in danger." "I'm already in too deep to turn back," Raymond replied. "If I let this go now, I'll be complicit in everything I've uncovered." The conversation ended in silence, but Raymond couldn't shake the tension. He wasn't just battling a system. He was fighting the deeply ingrained beliefs of those closest to him. One evening, Raymond returned home to find his car vandalized. The words, "Traitor," and "Keep quiet," were spray-painted in bold red letters across the side. The message was clear, but it only steeled his resolve. Raymond filed a report, and when detectives asked if he suspected anyone, he simply said, "Start with the cases I've ruled on recently. That should narrow it down." Naomi Parker heard about the incident and reached out. "You're not untouchable, Judge Hartford. Be careful," she cautioned during a rare, informal meeting at a coffee shop. Raymond smiled ruefully. "If I'm not making enemies, I'm not doing my job." Naomi leaned forward, her voice serious. "Just make sure you live long enough to finish what you've started." The investigation into corruption took a darker turn when Raymond discovered a paper trail implicating a powerful prosecutor, Leonard Hayes, not related to Elijah Hayes. Leonard had been burying evidence for years, ensuring convictions that bolstered his career. When Raymond confronted him during a hearing, Leonard's arrogance faltered. "You've overstepped, Raymond," Leonard hissed during a recess. "Do you really think you can take me down? I've got connections you can't even imagine." Raymond's response was measured but firm. "I don't need to imagine them, Leonard. I just need to prove they exist." Later that week, Raymond issued a formal report to the State Judiciary Committee, detailing Leonard's actions. The fallout was immediate. Leonard was suspended pending investigation, and his allies began to scatter, fearing their own exposure. Months later, a high-profile trial began. Officers, prosecutors, and even judges were brought to court to face charges of corruption. Raymond testified as a key witness, detailing the flaws he'd uncovered in the system he once trusted blindly. Naomi Parker sat in the gallery every day, her presence a quiet reminder of how far he'd come. The trial ended with multiple convictions and sweeping reforms mandated for the precinct and the district attorney's office. But it wasn't a perfect victory. Some culprits walked away with reduced sentences, and others resigned before charges could be filed. Raymond knew change would be slow, but it was a start. Months later, Raymond was in his chambers, preparing for another day of hearings, when he received a visitor. It was Elijah Hayes. "Mr. Hayes," Raymond said, surprised. "What brings you here?" Elijah smiled, his demeanor vastly different from the last time they'd met. "I wanted to thank you, Judge Hartford. I got my old job back and I'm going to night school now." "None of that would have been possible if you hadn't listened." Raymond stood and extended his hand. "I'm just glad you have your life back." As Elijah left, Raymond sat back in his chair, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Pride, not in his title or career, but in the lives he'd helped change. A year later, Raymond was invited to speak at a conference on judicial reform. As he stood before the audience, he thought about the journey that had brought him there. "I used to believe the law was infallible," he began. "But the law is only as just as the people who enforce it. Took me far too long to see that. Now I challenge all of you, judges, lawyers, and citizens alike, to question what justice truly means. Because justice isn't a destination. It's a journey. And we all have a role to play in making it better." The room erupted in applause, but Raymond's eyes sought out one familiar face in the crowd. Naomi Parker nodded, a faint smile on her lips, as if to say, "You've learned well, Judge Hartford." And for the first time, Raymond truly believed he had. What do you think about this story? Do you believe the judge redeemed himself? Or could he have done more to make a difference? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your opinions. And if you enjoyed the story and want to see more thought-provoking content like this, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.